5 cases that were solved decades later. Number 1. Golden State Killer. The Golden State Killer, also known as the East Area Rapist and the original Night Stalker, was a notorious serial rapist and murderer who committed a series of crimes in California during the 1970s and 1980s. The Golden State Killer was known for his meticulous planning and preparation. He often stalked his victims before attacking them in their homes, typically in suburban neighborhoods. His methods included restraining victims, often couples, before committing sexual assault. He also exhibited a high degree of sadism, taunting and threatening his victims. Despite an extensive and persistent investigation by law enforcement, the Golden State Killer managed to evade capture for decades. The case went cold, and various suspects were considered and eliminated over the years. In the absence of modern forensic technology, such as DNA analysis, the trail grew cold. In the early 2000s, DNA evidence from the crime scenes was linked to the same perpetrator, connecting the East Area Rapist, original Night Stalker, and the Golden State Killer cases. However, without a direct match to any individual in law enforcement databases or known criminal records, the case remained unsolved. In 2018, a breakthrough came when law enforcement used a novel approach. They uploaded the Golden State Killer's DNA profile to public genealogy databases, searching for relatives who had voluntarily submitted their DNA for genealogical research. Through this process, they were able to identify distant relatives of the suspect. Law enforcement eventually narrowed down their focus to Joseph James DeAngelo, a former police officer. In April 2018, DeAngelo was arrested at his home. Subsequent DNA analysis confirmed that his DNA matched that of the Golden State Killers. In June 2020, DeAngelo pleaded guilty to 13 counts of murder and numerous other charges related to his crimes. As part of a plea agreement, he was spared the death penalty and received multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. Number 2. BTK Killer. The BTK Killer, whose name stands for Bind, Torture, Kill, was a notorious serial killer who terrorized Wichita, Kansas, and its surrounding areas between the 1970s and 2005. The killer's real identity turned out to be Dennis Rader, a seemingly ordinary family man and a local church leader. The BTK Killer's crimes spanned from 1974 to 1991, during which he committed a series of brutal murders, sexual assaults, and acts of torture. His victims included men, women, and children, and he gained notoriety for his gruesome methods and the chilling, taunting letters he sent to the media and police. After disappearing for several years, in 2004, the BTK Killer resurfaced, sending a series of letters to the media. These letters led investigators to a floppy disk that was included in one of the communications. Although the floppy disk had been formatted, investigators were able to recover metadata from a deleted file that indicated the disk had been used on a computer at Christ Lutheran Church. The investigators traced the church computer's history and discovered that Dennis Rader was the president of the church council. Using DNA evidence from Rader's daughter's medical records, they were able to match the DNA found at the crime scenes to Rader's DNA. On February 25, 2005, Dennis Rader was arrested at his home. He pleaded guilty to 10 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms in prison without the possibility of parole. Number 3. Jacob Waterling Case. On the evening of October 22, 1989, in St. Joseph, Minnesota, Jacob and his brother were biking home with a friend after renting a movie from a nearby convenience store. A masked man with a gun emerged from the darkness and ordered the boys to lie in a ditch. After asking their ages, the man told Jacob's brother and his friend to run into the woods and not look back. When they eventually returned to the road, Jacob and the abductor were gone. The abduction triggered a massive search effort involving law enforcement agencies, volunteers, and the community. Despite extensive efforts, no significant leads or evidence emerged in the initial years following Jacob's disappearance. The case received massive media attention. Jacob's parents, Patty and Jerry Wetterling, became advocates for child safety and missing children's causes. For nearly 27 years, Jacob Wetterling's fate remained a mystery. The case received renewed attention in 2015, on the 26th anniversary of his disappearance, as investigators continued their efforts to solve the case. In 2016, a major development occurred. Daniel Heinrich, a man with prior child pornography convictions, was arrested on unrelated charges. After a plea agreement, Heinrich confessed to abducting and sexually assaulting Jacob Wetterling before killing him and burying his remains. Daniel Heinrich led law enforcement to a remote location where Jacob's remains were discovered, finally providing closure to the Wetterling family and the community. In September 2016, Heinrich was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison for child pornography possession, but was not charged directly for Jacob's abduction and murder due to the statute of limitations. Heinrich was not released at the end of his sentence and remained in civil commitment as a sexual predator. Number 4. John Emil List. On November 9, 1971, in Westfield, New Jersey, List murdered his wife, Helen, his mother, Alma, and his 3 children, Patricia, John Jr., and Frederick. He methodically killed each family member and then carefully arranged their bodies in the mansion's ballroom. Before committing the murders, List had been facing financial difficulties, and he believed that his family's moral values were being compromised. He meticulously planned the murders, including halting their mail and school attendance, in an attempt to cover up his actions and evade detection. After killing his family, List disappeared and changed his identity, using aliases and moving to different states. He started a new life and found employment, all while keeping his true identity hidden. List's downfall came in 1989 when an episode of the television show America's Most Wanted profiled the case. The show featured an age-progressed clay bust of what List might look like at the time. The episode led to a viewer tip that eventually led authorities to List's new identity and location in Richmond, Virginia. In 1990, John List was arrested, and he was subsequently tried and convicted of 5 counts of first-degree murder. During the trial, his defense argued that he suffered from dissociative identity disorder, but the jury rejected this defense. In 1990, List was sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms in prison. Number 5. The Green River Killer. The Green River Killer, whose real name is Gary Ridgway, is one of the most notorious serial killers in American history. Gary Ridgway began his killing spree in the early 1980s. He targeted vulnerable women, often luring them into his vehicle under the pretense of offering them a ride or money for sex. He would then take them to secluded areas where he would strangle them. After killing his victims, he would often dump their bodies in wooded areas, along roadsides, or in riverbeds, earning him the moniker Green River Killer due to the proximity to the Green River. Ridgway's calculated approach to selecting victims and his disposal methods allowed him to avoid capture for a long time. Despite law enforcement efforts and media attention, the killer continued to elude authorities, leaving behind few leads or evidence to connect him to the crimes. In 2001, advancements in DNA technology allowed forensic scientists to connect Ridgway to some of the victims through DNA evidence found on their bodies. Facing overwhelming evidence, Gary Ridgway was arrested in 2001. In a plea deal, he confessed to the murders of 48 women and agreed to provide information about the locations of their remains. In exchange for his cooperation and information, he avoided the death penalty and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Support us for more videos.